And so then verse 33, as Paul continues, who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect, or to the believer? It is God who justifieth, and so on and so forth. All right, but back here into the Jewish economy again, it's the same God. God hasn't changed. Just because he changes his program in dealing from the Jew to the Gentile, God hasn't changed. All right, back to Acts 5 then, verse 40. And so to him they agreed. These religious leaders listened to Gamaliel. And so when they had called the apostles and beaten them, they at least got that much on them. They commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. Now there again, do you see the connotation? What were they not to preach? The name of Jesus. Now, I think had they been dealing with Paul, they would have said, don't you ever again preach death, burial, and resurrection. Because here there are a lot of people couldn't believe in resurrection, for one thing. But here they don't mention that. They just simply say, don't you ever again teach in the name of Jesus. So they departed, verse 41, from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And then 42, and daily, where? In the temple. See? The temple is still operating. The temple is still the center of Jewish life. That hasn't changed. Oh, I want you to see that. Now, when we get to Paul, I know there's going to be a time or two where he's going to take a Jewish vow and he's going to become a Jew in order to reach Jew. But see, Paul has nothing to do with the temple in his missionary journeys. He doesn't tell his new converts up there in Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey, now, you be sure and get to the temple the first chance you get. No, he doesn't do that. But instead, what does he do? He sets up little congregations of believers in homes, small little groups of believers. You know, we were talking the other night. For 20-some years now, I have been, I think, blessed of the Lord in teaching these small groups outside of the church environment. And I'm not against the church, not at all. And those of you who know me personally know that. I have never told anyone to quit going to their church or whatever it is. In fact, I've had a lady ask me not too long ago again, what should I do? Oh, I haven't got time. Maybe I do. I'll take it. Quite a few years ago, we were still teaching in a college here in Oklahoma, an evening class in their adult education section. And we always had a paid enrollment of between 40 and 45 people in that college classroom. Taught there for 13 years, just exactly the way I teach to you. No opposition. And the dean of academics would come whenever he could, he and his wife. And so he heard me teach. He knew what I was teaching. But he told me one night after class, he says, you know, Les, I had an interesting experience several weeks ago. He says, my own pastor stopped me on the street. Now, I can say this because all the players are gone. They're no longer around. I don't even know where they've gone. But he said, my own pastor stopped me on the street one night, and he said, Doctor, he said, what kind of a kooky Bible class do you have out there anyway? Because he said, if you've got a Bible class in a college such as yours, it must be just a bunch of kooks. And he says, you know, I didn't even try to argue the point with him. I just said, well, Pastor, I'm going to make a point to get a roster of Les's class, and I'm going to carry it in my coat pocket, and the next time I see you, I'm going to show it to you. And so he says, it wasn't but about 3 days later, and he says, I met him on the street again, and I said, oh, by the way, Pastor, that kooky Bible class you were asking about, here's his roster of class people. Now, we had a mix of college students and adults. And he says he went down that roster, and he said he almost turned pale. And he said, that's most of my deacons and Sunday school teachers. But see, this is exactly what most of my classes have been. Most of you are active in your various churches. I have never encouraged anyone to leave their particular church. And they certainly don't have to leave to follow me. All we teach for is so that they can go in and teach and share these things with other folk, because after all, it's the name. All right, but getting back to the original church, Paul didn't set up huge edifices on a corner someplace. He set up a little group of believers in a home. Well, what I was really going to say, and I come to the conclusion that maybe there's a reason, and I'm not alone. There are many that are teaching these little small home Bible classes. And I'm always reminded of Watchman Nee. Now, some of you may have heard of him, and some of you have never heard of him. But Watchman Nee was a Bible teacher in China just before the communists took over. And Watchman Nee did much the same as I and many others are doing. He never taught that much in the local organized church. He taught in little home Bible studies, all over Shanghai in particular. And he was preparing them, without their knowing it, for the day when the organized church doors were locked. But these little Bible studies could just continue on. And consequently, when we came back into China a few years ago and the doors had kind of opened, the Western world was aghast for all the believers that were still in China. Why? Because these little home Bible studies went underground, yeah, but they didn't destroy them. But they did destroy the organized church. And we may face the same thing someday, where our churches will be locked and we will be forbidden. But oh, listen, they're going to have a hard time stopping 3 or 4 families meeting together in their own home. But anyhow, that's how the church started. It was not huge congregations. It was just a few meeting in a home atmosphere. But here, in verse 42, they are still meeting where? In the temple. They're still under Judaism, but they have separated themselves from the mainstream of Judaism by recognizing who Jesus was. All right, now remember, they've been selling all their goods, all their land, they're cashing in their CDs, and they're putting all their money in the common kitty, and they're all living out of it. Now, everything has been going just hunky-dory for about, where are we now? We're about 7 years after Pentecost. 7 years. And things have just been going great. No discord, no disagreement of doctrine. The 12 are under complete control of the whole thing. And now in chapter 6, I call it the first signs of trouble in paradise. Now look at it, verse 1. In those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, in other words, these Jewish believers coming in, quite a few thousand of them, there arose a what? Murmuring. Now you haven't seen language like that in the first 5 chapters. It said they were all of one mind, all of one accord, no one lacked, everybody had all they needed because the kitty was full. But I don't imagine they had 20% interest in those days either, and so what happened? Hey, the kitty was getting a little short.